Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the Chinese capital rolls out the red carpet for DPRK leader Kim Jong Un, who was on a 4-day unofficial visit. What's the word on his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping? And listen in on the conversation with Stephen Ordens, the president of National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, who's upbeat about growing ties between the two countries despite recent trade disputes. Yes, you're watching World Insight. We start our show today in Beijing, where Chinese President and CPC General Secretary Xi Jinping welcomed the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim Jong Un. The unofficial visit lasted from Sunday to Wednesday. Let's take a closer look at what happened at the meeting.
Kim Jong Un made his first trip to Beijing as DPRK leader from Sunday to Wednesday. A milestone, the DPRK's KCNA news agency quoted Kim as saying, in improving bilateral relations. Although billed as an unofficial visit, the talks between President Xi and the DPRK leader touched on far-reaching issues. On the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, President Xi said China has always adhered to the goal of safeguarding peace and stability in the region and solving problems through dialogue and consultation. The DPRK leader also stated his commitment to denuclearizing the peninsula and said the country is open to dialogue with the United States. On bilateral relations, President Xi and Kim affirmed the close relationship between China and the DPRK. Both referred to the friendship as a strategic choice. And on Wednesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said Kim's visit was a testimony of the China-DPRK friendship.
中朝之间有着高层互访的传统。
China and the DPRK have a tradition of high-level exchanges. In fact, high-level exchanges have played a leading role in promoting bilateral relations. During this visit, Chinese President Xi Jinping said he is willing to keep in frequent contact with Comrade Chairman through various forms, such as exchanging visits and sending special envoys and letters to each other. China is willing to increase high-level exchanges, strengthen strategic communications, and expand cooperation to benefit the people of both countries.
South Korea's Unification Ministry reacted to the meeting by saying it welcomes the visit by the DPRK leader to Beijing. China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi will visit Seoul on Thursday and brief officials, including President Moon Jae-in, on the meeting.
The Chinese government had informed us in advance that it was going to announce the visit of the DPRK leader Kim Jong Un. I can say that South Korea and China are having close consultations.
The White House, meanwhile, also said that China's government had communicated the upshot of the visit on Tuesday.
On Kim Jong-un's unofficial visit to China, let's turn to our very strong panel. Joining us, the panelists, Shanghai, Shen Dingli, professor of Fudan University Institute of International Studies. Good to see you, sir. In Medford, we have Sun Yong Lee, a Kim Koo Korea Foundation professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. Welcome as well. And last but not least, in Washington, D.C., in the U.S., we invited Douglas Paul, Vice President of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. I know, gentlemen, you know each other very well over the years. Let's focus on this big news today. Mr. Shen, one of the most important things that we need to look at is whether this meeting between the two sides, North Korea and China, is likely to help with the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. From the Xinhua News press release, it indicated very clearly North Korea is committed to denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. And yet, in the official news agency in North Korea, that is not mentioned. Mr. Shen, what is the message here?
Well, as long as the DPRK leader would commit to denuclearizing the country, China would give him strong support that this is our shared purpose. So we share the purpose with the other 5 parties of the 6-party talk, and we should encourage him. But we may expect that the process of negotiating with the U.S. Could be a tricky one, and we would encourage him not to be dissuaded if there's some challenge would emerge. We should work together to beat the challenge to make the DPRK nuclear weapon free.
So the problem could be with the United States, Mr. Paul. According to Professor Shen in Shanghai, we already know a tweet has coming out from your president talking about sanctions still on. So what exactly is this complex, in a way, feeling coming from Washington regarding the latest meeting?
Well, it's quite clear that in his statement about denuclearization, the North Korean leader included some conditions for denuclearization, including phased mutual steps. And in the past, these conditions have amounted to a demand for the United States to sign a peace treaty, end its presence in the alliance in South Korea, and reduce its capabilities to defend Japan and South Korea. And these have been deal breakers in the past. And we haven't touched on the very difficult problems of, if you do get past those preconditions and start to have an agreement, then you've got to verify the agreement. And verification in North Korea is an extremely high obstacle.
But you're saying what? Is there going to be some reactions coming from Washington giving a little bit boost about what is likely to happen?
Well, I think Washington is going to ask, both in the private channels that are now being used, in the summit that we expect will take place, and if there are follow-on negotiations, the U.S. will ask, what are these conditions? What do they mean? Do you really talk about denuclearization, or is it about dismantling the capabilities of your neighboring countries to defend themselves? And that'll be a subject of intense discussion.
On the other hand, Professor Lee, the inter-Korea relationship has been mentioned by the North Korean leader. How do you see that relationship evolve over the past few weeks, likely to contribute, first of all, North Korea's relationship with the regional power like China, and secondly, the negotiation process with the United States?
South Korea is the easiest target for North Korea in softening up your adversary, and North Korea has already achieved that with its charm offensive during the Winter Olympics. I have to say, this day, the anti-social North Korean leader's visit to Beijing was bound to happen, like death and taxes. It was bound to happen. And Kim Jong-un, I must say, is a very dutiful son. He's really stealing pages out of his own daddy's playbook from 2000. Kim Jong-il made his first visit to China since becoming the leader of the DPRK 6 years into his reign, his rule, in late May 2000, on the eve of his first summit meeting ever with the South Korean leader. Why would Kim Jong-il do that? Why is Kim Jong-un doing this now? Well, obviously to seek Chinese counsel and to coordinate policy. What would the leaders have talked about? Well, you know, the timetable, perhaps drawing out phased negotiations, and how to get the U.S. nuclear extended deterrence out of the region. Various issues would have come out, and it's only natural that Kim made this pilgrimage at this time.
Talk about this meeting, Professor Shen in Shanghai. Two things are being mentioned in the Xinhua report regarding what Mr. Kim said. He said, according to the press, that he came to China and informed the Chinese side, particularly Chinese President Xi Jinping, out of, quote, comradeship and moral responsibility, end of quote. What exactly, Professor Shen, is China taking these words as?
Well, at the surface value, he seems to say we have a partnership, comrade partnership. So I have my responsibility to brief you what's going to happen, and I may seek your advice. And at the same time, he seems to say we're Asian people, we have Confucius ethics, so we have some kind of a brothership. So as a younger generation leader, I have a duty to pay respect to you, to seek your advice. So he seems to be, to both mention the strategic partnership, which is bound by the mutual defense treaty, and also the blood bond relationship, without mentioning the blood bond term. So in order to please the Chinese leader and the Chinese audience.
We have seen the so-called traditional friendship between China and the DPRK evolving over the years. It has been established and carefully groomed, as they say, by the elder generations of leaders of both countries. Take a look at this. 1950s to the 1990s, DPRK leader Kim Jong-un visited China many times. In 1982, Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping visited the DPRK to take part in the celebration of Kim Jong-un's 70th birthday. From 2000 to 2011, Kim Jong-un visited China several times, and as the DPRK leader, and Tula President Xi Jinping's predecessor also visited Pyongyang in 2001 and 2005, and then over the weekend, the very first visit, though unofficial, the current leader Kim Jong Un paid his first visit to China since he took power. So, Professor Shen, do you see, as Chinese President Xi said during his meeting with his North Korean counterpart, about a continuation of this friendship over generations cultivated by leaders, countries, and parties? I remember he specifically mentioned these three layers of relations. Do you think that is a continuity, or this has been shaped in a different light? Professor Shen.
President Xi Jinping mentioned the tradition of high-level exchange visit between the two countries. He failed to mention that due to the fact that the DPRK's current leader, his push of nuclear and missile development, which violated the international consensus, the UN Security Council has made many resolutions to disallow and to sanction DPRK's bad behavior. This has hurt the tradition, hurt China's legitimate interest. And it's not our problem, it's DPRK's problem that has made such a kind of a long history not to continue. But we're happy that the younger generation feels he has a duty, he has responsibility, he would fix the problem. So he is welcome. We hope through this visit, the high-level exchange, the letter exchange, the envoy exchange would resume to mutual satisfaction.
Now, we know that after this informal, so-called unofficial meeting, we're going to see, as planned, the visit to South Korea and also the visit to the United States. We have heard about the negotiation possibilities. So, Professor Lee, at this point, what would be the significance of this meeting when it comes to real specific preparations for the next two meetings?
Well, this summit meeting restores China to its proper place as being in the driver's seat, being the center of the six-party talks framework, if you will. There was great pomp and ceremony. You know, Kim Jong-un talked about the alliance forged in blood, sacrifice of blood and lives in the past. President Xi spoke even of his own father, who greeted Kim Jong-il when he visited China in June 1983, and so on. So there was great warmth and bonhomie, and that's to be expected between the two allies. What's going to happen in the coming weeks and months is Japan, feeling very nervous of being sidelined, will try all the more vigorously to engage Kim Jong-un. And this is a pattern that we've seen before. Whenever one of the parties, South Korea, US, or Japan, spurts ahead of the others in engaging North Korea, the other allies grow a bit nervous.
But the thing is, how likely is this going to push forward the agenda of further negotiation to denuclearize? How are parties, South Korea included, likely to draw up the roadmap and the timetable, as you just mentioned, Professor Lee, very briefly?
The negotiations will be protracted, they'll be phased out over the years, and in the meantime, the dynamics, the atmospherics will change in Kim Jong-un's favor. All the parties know Kim wants the U.S. troops in South Korea to withdraw. Therefore, Kim will tell President Moon and President Trump that he does not make that, the withdrawal of U.S. troops, a precondition for talks. He's okay with it. He even understands the stabilizing role that the U.S. troops play in the region, and thus mesmerize much of the world. We've seen that with Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il telling various Americans and others exactly the same thing.
Mr. Paul, so what is going to be this meeting's significance when it comes to U.S.-China interactions toward the DPRK issue? We see the two countries now in a spar over trade dispute, but at the same time, according to the president's tweet in the morning, that he was informed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping about the latest meeting. So how should we understand this meeting between the North and China in the overall bigger picture of the region and even across the Pacific? Mr. Paul.
Well, I think your other guests have said much the same thing I'm going to say, which is China is back into this game. Meetings are scheduled, inter-Korean activity will take place, and U.S.-North Korean consultations at the highest level. For China not to be involved in this in some way would be strange and probably make ultimately, if there is to be some resolution, then we can all be skeptical about that, but if there is to be some resolution, China will have an important role to play, and so too will Japan in time. So it's important for all the players to get back involved. I would not be surprised over the next couple of months to see Kim make a trip to Moscow as well, because even though the Russians are not as active as they might be, they have expressed an interest, and I think it's important for all the parties to the six-party talks to have a role in what goes forward now in this effort to determine what Kim means when he says denuclearization.
Well, Mr. Shen in Shanghai, it is not news that China over the years was not necessarily happy from time to time about some of the missile launches and the nuclear tests going on inside the DPRK. And now will this meeting change everything? The warm relations between the two countries back on track? Professor Shen, what do you think?
According to what the Xinhua News Agency and the CCTV has reviewed, that seems to be the case, because DPRK's current leader has said China has made a lot of progress, China has many good news, China has many bigger events, and DPRK feels happy. So actually China does not feel happy for DPRK shooting missile, testing nuclear weapon. When China convenes Belt and Road Summit, China hosts G20, and China organizes major international events. But now he said, your events are good. That's good news, and we are happy with yours, which means he may commit in a subtle way. He is not going to shoot a missile and test a nuclear weapon, at least right before China's next major international event. That's good. We hope he would not test ICBM or nuclear weapon, not just right before China's major event, but every day he would not do.
Okay.
That would nurture our new trust with him and his government.
Absolutely. Professor Shen, I also have a follow-up question about that. I mean, China, according to Chinese President Xi Jinping in the meeting, he said very clearly, China hopes that the country of DPRK will have political stability, economic development, and the livelihood of the people will be happy. So that's the wish coming from China toward its neighbor. The message is very clear how China sees its neighbor's future. But the question is, well, at the same time, talking about the denuclearization on Korean Peninsula, what about the bilateral relationship? And what about the internal development inside the DPRK? These are all intertwined, of course. Professor Shen.
He seemed to say that we care your internal stability. We are not interested in seeing North Korea will be unstable. But he did not say, but I can take if the current kind of nuclear and missile development would continue, that would absolutely incur more international sanction. That is not favorable for DPRK's economic development, would not be make your people happy, and would not make your system stable. So we hope you would think twice, and your visit to China opens a new page that you may have a fresh, new thinking, and that's good, and we encourage.
Mr. Paul, how do you see that relationship between China and North Korea, particularly after this meeting? Both sides have been committed at this time, even though it's an unofficial visit, but both sides seem to be committed back to a traditional friendship and also be supportive in this neutral defense way. So is that the message you're reading, Mr. Paul?
Well, at one point during their discussions, President Xi referred to the spring bringing things back to life during the visit of Comrade Kim to Beijing. And I think that is a metaphor for the cool weather that has prevailed in Sino-Korean relations over the last 5 years, with the multiple nuclear and missile tests, with damage to people in the regime of North Korea who had been close to China, had been their interlocutors with China. And so I think this is a signal saying, okay, you stop the testing, you stop the missile firings, you get into talks to denuclearize, and we can start having warmer relations because you are not damaging China's interests in the way you were for the previous 5 years. So I see this as sort of marking a break and a test.
I see. Well, our time is up. I'm sure those conversations will continue. For now, I want to thank the three of you for being with us on this great and big news. Shunding Li, Sun Yong Li, Douglas Paul. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it.